I took a deep breath and glanced at my black wristwatch. It was 12:30 p.m. It had been an incredibly long day. It seemed like only a short time ago that I had crawled out of bed and was already sitting at my desk. As I sat at my desk in the Sanders and Kober office, I prayed that the time would fly by so that I could leave at 6 p.m. to meet my friends at Sanders's cafe by 6:30. I sincerely hoped that it would happen. Sanders's cafe was our favorite weekend hangout. By us, I mean Clara, Ethan, and me. We had been inseparable friends for years. Maggie, my boss, Michael Sanders, called. I looked up from my computer screen at the sound of his voice. He was carrying a stack of papers. "Can you make copies?" he asked politely. I loved that Michael always asked, even if it was part of my job. I had only been there a couple of weeks, but he seemed like a nice guy. Not in a romantic way. He was in his 50s, just easy to work with. "Sure, no problem." I smiled and took the papers from him. "Thanks, Maggie," he smiled back. "And call me Michael, not Mr. Sanders." I smiled again. "Okay, I'll try to get used to it." When Michael left, I headed to the copy machine. It was really going to be a long day. Standing by the copy machine, I yawned tiredly. I had spent the previous evening with Clara, comforting her after yet another setback in her love life. We had a few glasses of wine, and I had gone to bed well past midnight. After I finished copying, I returned to the office with a stack of papers in my hands. The office was quiet, as most of the employees had gone to lunch. I yanked the door to my office open, walked in, and saw something I didn't expect. Standing in front of me was Daniel Sanders, Michael's son, with a girl from the marketing department, Laura. They clearly weren't expecting to be caught in such an intimate moment. "Maggie!" Laura screamed, trying to cover herself. Daniel turned around, and I saw his dark, menacing gaze. "Get out!" he hissed. I slammed the door shut, feeling my cheeks burn. Back at my desk, I tried not to think about what had happened, but the scene wouldn't leave my mind. Later, when everyone had returned from lunch, Daniel appeared at the door of my office. "Maggie, please come in." Trying to remain calm, I walked into his office. He was already sitting at his desk, staring at me. "You should have knocked," he said. I rolled my eyes inwardly, but out loud I answered politely, "I didn't know that. Be more careful next time." I nodded, silently cursing myself for not being able to answer him. He was too powerful a man to allow such an oversight. "I don't care what my father thinks," Daniel interrupted sharply. "He may not care, but I don't like it." Unlike my father, he clearly had secrets of his own. Why was he doing this in the office? It was so unprofessional. "Your father asked me to leave the papers on his desk. I didn't think anyone would be here, and I certainly didn't expect you to do that." Daniel narrowed his eyes, his voice laced with sarcasm. "You mean fuck?" He looked at me coldly. "It's just a word, Maggie. Don't be afraid to say it." My cheeks flushed again at the remark. I felt incredibly awkward. "I'd rather not talk about it. It's not very professional." He stood up from his desk and began to slowly approach me. When Daniel was close enough, I could smell his expensive perfume. "You walked into my office without knocking, and now you're talking about professionalism?" His mocking tone left no doubt about his intentions. "What you did wasn't very professional either," I muttered, realizing that I couldn't take back my words. "Damn, I'm definitely going to get fired." Daniel's frown deepened, his expression hardening. "I strongly recommend you get back to work before you get fired before your first paycheck." "Damn. Maggie, what happened?" "Okay, Mr. Daniel." I tried to contain my excitement, hoping that this was the end of the conversation, and quickly caught my breath. "I'll just go do my job. To you, I'm Mr. Daniel Sanders. Don't forget that." There was no friendliness in his voice. He insisted that I call him by his last name, while his father, Michael, was much more lenient and even asked me to call him by his first name. The difference between father and son was like night and day. The door suddenly swung open, and Michael walked into the office. He looked at us both with a wary expression, clearly sensing the tension. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking at me intently. I remained silent, waiting for Daniel to say something, trying to come up with a plausible explanation. "It's okay," Daniel said sharply, not sparing me a glance, and sat back down at his desk. Michael looked at me, clearly not trusting his son's words. "Maggie, are you okay?" I smiled, albeit tensely, hoping that I could smooth things over. "Yes, it's okay, Mr. Michael. I was just checking to see if 50 copies of the documents would be enough, or if you needed more." Michael smiled his usual warm smile. 50 will be enough. Thank you, dear." I nodded and quickly left the office. After what happened, all I wanted to do was hide behind my desk and wait for the day to end. But before I could hide, Daniel turned to me. "Maggie." I turned around, not hiding my irritation. "Yes, Mr. Daniel?" He sat down in his chair, barely holding back a satisfied smirk. "Bring me coffee. I need a pick-me-up." I clenched my teeth, barely holding back a sarcastic remark. "Okay, I'll get it now." Daniel had never asked me to bring him coffee before. I knew it was his little revenge for the incident this morning, but it didn't matter. Sooner or later, he would regret his presumption. I worked all day for Mr. Daniel, not for the father, son. Ever since I caught him with Laura, he made me run like a squirrel in a wheel as a punishment. It was obvious that he now had a personal grudge against me, although to be honest, I wasn't thrilled with it either. The phone on the table rang. It was Ethan. How unexpected. I'm sure he was checking how late I was going to be for work, even though I had to leave in 15 minutes. "Ethan, we're already at Sanders's cafe drinking to you. Are you on your way already?" He was clearly impatient. "In case you forgot, I finish at 6. I threw my things into the bag my parents got me last Christmas and was about to leave." "Hurry up. Clara's only had one drink and she's already getting on everyone's nerves." Ethan chuckled, and I heard Clara's cheerful voice in the background. "Those two are simply inseparable. I'll be leaving soon. You have no idea how awful this day has been. There's so much I need to tell you." But as soon as I turned around, I noticed Daniel standing next to me. He crossed his arms and looked at me with obvious irritation. My heart sank and my face turned red. "I have to go. See you later," I said quickly, and hung up before Ethan could answer. My legs were shaking slightly with nervousness, and I didn't know what to say. "Are you okay, Mr. Daniel?" I managed to squeeze out, hoping my voice wasn't shaking. Daniel stared at me for a few seconds before answering. "I need you to stay late tonight. I have work that needs to be finished by Monday morning." "But I have..." I started, desperately trying to come up with an excuse. "What? You have more important things to do than keep your new job? Don't make the mistake of pissing me off a second time, Maggie. It won't end well for you. He's such a jerk." I had planned to spend the evening with friends, and now it was clearly not going to happen. I could have said no, but I couldn't afford to lose this job. "Okay, I can stay," I said, trying to sound calm, even though I was seething inside. He handed me a folder. 50 copies. I'm sure you can do it. Just do it quickly, and then schedule some meetings with me." I smiled, even though I was seething inside. Bastard. Daniel turned to head to his office and said over his shoulder, "And by the way, no personal calls during work hours. I hope I don't have to say that twice." Daniel Sanders said this loudly enough for everyone in the office to hear. Now everyone knew the new girl was in trouble with the big boss. God, give me strength. "Can you hold the door?" I asked desperately, balancing on my hands. But she just looked at me like I was nothing and walked into the elevator, clearly looking like a rude person. Mr. Daniel, hoping that today I could avoid another fit of irritation. "Come in." Daniel's voice was calm, but there was a hint of impatience. I'm sure he saw me trying to turn around with a small stack of papers, but he wasn't going to come in and open the door to help. I fumbled with the doorknob until I managed to open the door with my hip. Sweating profusely, I finally made it to his desk and placed the paper in front of him. "I see you've learned your lesson," he smirked, leaning forward. "I suppose all is not lost." "I'm not one to repeat my mistakes," I replied coolly, trying to maintain my composure. "I made 55 copies just in case." He glanced at the paper, then said with a sneer, "That's quite a lot. Your little hands must be tired after all that hard work." I held back my irritation. Seriously? Should I file a complaint against him for those comments? I picked up one of the brochures and leaned forward slightly, placing it in front of him. "I've bolded the important parts so they're easier to see." Daniel's smile widened. "You certainly have my attention, Maggie." His gaze slid slowly down my body. He placed his hand on my blouse. "Did you leave that button undone on purpose?" I glanced down at my blouse and was horrified to see my blue bra between the buttons. Holding back my conversation, I buttoned the button silently, ignoring his gaze. "You did that. For me?" His voice was full of barely concealed interest. "They're just boobs, Maggie," he added with a smug grin. "I'm a man. I've seen them." "Of course I have. Especially in the last couple of hours. With Laura, I have." Folding my arms over my chest, I answered, "Do you need anything else, or can I leave?" "No, I don't need you for anything anymore. Consider this the end of the end for you. Now you know how to piss me off better." I forced myself to restrain myself from sinking to his level. "See you Monday morning." With one word, I hurried out of my office and gathered my things. That evening, I sat at the bar with Ethan and Clara, beginning to relax after the grueling day. "I'm so sorry I'm so late," I said, sitting down next to Clara, who was sipping a scotch and Coke. Ethan pushed a glass of wine toward me. "You're almost 2 hours late. What happened?" "Mr. Daniel made me stay and make the official photocopies because I caught him in his office with Laura from accounting." I raised my glass and took a long-awaited sip of wine. "Wow, what a lucky Laura," Clara muttered with a disgruntled smirk. "What does she have that I don't?" "Huge boobs," I joked. "But trust me, you don't want that guy. He's a total jerk and has no respect for anyone." Clara giggled. "I don't need his respect, just that I like him. I want to see him naked." "Maybe you could invite me to the Christmas party." She winked. "Sorry, Clara, that's for employees only." I walked back to my desk. "Honestly, I'm not sure I'm going to that party myself." "You have to go," Ethan interjected. "I heard the Sanders and Cummer Christmas party is something special. Rumor has it there'll be strippers and a raffle." I rolled my eyes. "I'm thinking about it. I'll decide closer to the date." Even though I didn't want to go, I knew I'd have to patch things up with my coworkers, especially Michael and Daniel. The next morning, I burst into the office with a strong coffee in one hand and my bag in the other. My eyes were stinging from lack of sleep, and my mind was still racing with the thoughts from the night before. I needed to focus on work because my meeting with Daniel on Monday morning was not going to be good. "Morning, Maggie." Chris, a colleague from marketing, greeted me warmly as he passed. "Hi," I mumbled, nodding as I walked. My insides were seething. I knew Daniel would try to pressure me again or make new demands. After everything that had happened last week, his constant teasing had become almost unbearable. Sitting at my desk, I opened my laptop and began scrolling through my emails. The seconds ticked by like clockwork, and every time the door to Daniel's office opened, I felt my heart speed up. Half an hour later, a text came through. "Daniel is waiting for you in his office." "Great," I thought, walking toward him. I knocked on the door, and the same voice that had irritated me so much yesterday answered. "Come in, Maggie." I took a deep breath and walked in. He was sitting at his desk, looking through some papers. Without even looking at me, He gestured for me to sit down. "How was your weekend?" he finally asked, looking up. "Not bad," I replied dryly, not intending to pursue the topic further. "So, are you ready for a new project?" His tone was such that it was a statement, not a question. "A project?" I smiled guardedly. "Sure, what project?" He handed me a folder, and I opened it, raising my eyebrows. Inside were plans for a new advertising launch for one of his clients. "We need to get this all organized as soon as possible, Maggie. You can handle it, right?" I nodded, although inside I was already seething. Think of it as a test of sorts. Prove that you can work under pressure. I bowed my head, trying not to show my emotions, but inside I was seething. "Of course, Mr. Daniel. I'll take care of it right now." "Okay." He nodded with a smile. "And try not to make any more little mistakes like last week. I don't want to hear any more complaints." His words were like a veiled threat. I knew that I would have to do everything in my power to pass this test, but I was not going to back down. A voice inside me was telling me that this was another game of Daniel's, and I needed to be on guard. "That's it, Maggie. You can go." I quickly left the office, taking the folder with the project with me. It was going to be a long one, and the week was stressful, but I was ready to do whatever it took to prove my worth. I spent the day immersed in preparing the project. By evening, I had almost finished the main tasks when I heard a knock on the door. It was Chris. "Maggie, are you leaving yet?" she asked, peering through my window. "Almost done," I smiled, feeling a little tired. "Want to grab dinner with the team? We're going to a bar nearby." I thought about it. The idea of spending the evening away from work sounded tempting, but I knew I still had some important details to finish. "Thanks, Chris, but I think I'll stay and finish this. See you tomorrow?" She shrugged and said goodbye, leaving me alone again with a pile of papers and a computer. I took a deep breath, continuing to immerse myself in my work. But I knew I couldn't tolerate Daniel's attitude for much longer. The question was, when would I finally be able to dot the I's and cross the T's? The next few days were a blur. I was completely immersed in the project Daniel had assigned me as his test. Every day started with early mornings and ended with late nights at the office. Coffee became my only friend, and fatigue my constant companion. I knew I couldn't afford to make a mistake. The project was important to the company, and I was determined to get it right. Daniel tested me periodically, constantly making small but caustic comments that only added to the stress. But I learned not to react, or at least to pretend I didn't care. On Friday, as I was finishing up the presentation, a message from Chris suddenly appeared on my desk. "You did it, Maggie. Great job. You can breathe a sigh of relief." I leaned back in my chair with relief. It had been a long and stressful journey, but the project was finally finished. All that was left was to present it to the management. "Now the hardest part is over," I reassured myself, typing a reply to Chris. "Yes, time to relax." As I was leaving the office in the evening, Daniel unexpectedly appeared in the hallway. I expected more comments from him, but to my surprise, his face was serious and without his usual smirk. "Maggie, the project looks good. See you at the presentation on Monday." He said it in a new tone, not sarcasm, but rather respect. Perhaps I managed to find him funds for more than he thought. I turned around and walked on, feeling my soul becoming lighter. Monday came faster than I expected. The presentation went well. Everything I presented was met with approving nods from the management. When it was over, I could finally relax and enjoy the feeling of accomplishment. The atmosphere in the office changed too. Chris congratulated me on a great job, and Carla even suggested that we celebrate the evening at the bar. Daniel seemed to be looking for something to complain about, and even once noticed that he was happy with how the situation turned out. It may have been a small step forward, but for me, it was the beginning of something new. I no longer felt like an insecure newbie, realizing that I could handle even difficult tasks and people like Daniel. Let this be the beginning of something good, I thought, looking at the approaching evening outside the office windows. I sat at a table in a cafe and watched the soft evening light reflect in the windows. I did not expect that a few months after our first meeting, my life would change so much. The relationship with Daniel, which was simply business, gradually developed into something more. It all started with light conversations about work, jokes, and mutual independence. I noticed how Daniel became closer every day, and his cold professional mask weakened. He stopped being just a boss and turned into a person with whom I could discuss anything, from work to the most personal topics. Each of our conversations became more and more frank, and feelings that I had not previously realized began to manifest themselves more vividly. One day, when we were left alone in the office after a late meeting, Daniel suddenly came up to me and, a little awkwardly, offered to walk me home. I agreed, and that evening became a turning point. In the silence of our car ride with the sounds of light music from the radio, something changed between us. His tone of voice became quieter. His breathing became longer than before. I felt my heart beat faster. The moment we stopped in front of my house, Daniel suddenly leaned down and touched my lips. It was a light, gentle kiss that lasted only a few seconds, but it caused a real explosion in my soul. I could not believe that this was really happening. The next few weeks, our relationship developed rapidly. We met at work, together in the evenings and even on weekends. Our connection became stronger and stronger. Daniel, who previously seemed so withdrawn and secretive, and also rude and indecent, opened his heart to me. He admitted that he always considered himself lonely, unable to open up to a relationship. But I changed him. I simply taught him to trust and love, and, however, our love was not cloudless. I knew that a relationship with a boss could cause rumors and gossip at work. And indeed, soon suspicious looks and discussions began to appear around us. This began to worry Daniel, who was afraid that our relationship would destroy his foundations and reputation. He offered to keep our relationship a secret, and I agreed, although this decision was too cruel for me. Despite all the difficulties, we continued to see each other. I saw Daniel struggling with contradictions. On the one hand, he wanted to be with me. On the other, he was afraid of the consequences. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, we met in the park. Daniel was in a bad mood, and I felt that he wanted to say something. "Maggie," he began, not looking me in the eye. "I can't go on like this. I love you, but our relationship contributes to everything I have achieved. I'm afraid that this is destroying us both." I listened to him with bated breath, and I knew that this moment would come, but I was not ready for it. "I love you too, Daniel," I answered quietly, "but I don't want to be your secret." He was silent for a long time, and then, taking my hand, he said, "You're right. And if we can't be together, then maybe this is the end." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I knew Daniel was right. We couldn't hide it any longer. It was too much for both of us. At that moment, I realized that our love was real, but it couldn't survive in the conditions we found ourselves in. In the evening, we said goodbye. Daniel left, leaving me standing on an empty park path, my heart breaking with pain. But I knew it was the right decision. Weeks passed, and I gradually learned to live without Daniel. I went back to work, tried not to think about him, and focus on my goals. But despite the pain I had to endure, I was grateful for the moments we spent together. This relationship taught me to love and be loved. I looked at the sunset and smiled, remembering everything we experienced. Sometimes love comes to teach us lessons, even if it doesn't stay with us forever.